James Schramko here, and for a change, we're actually having a chat with Stefan Spencer about Stefan Spencer and the SEO universe. And I know this is a little bit of a different take to your regular episode, Stefan, but as someone who's known you for a long time, I think it's easy to always be focusing on everyone else. You're such a server of others, and you go out there and investigate what's happening and bringing the best stuff back for your own audience. But I think sometimes the audience wants to know more about you, because every time I've shared with you, I've learnt so much. And let's see if we can give something back to your listener and step into the Stefan Spencer story a little bit and see what we can learn. I think it would be a good start to give us a little bit of the backstory to how this podcast came about, because you have been on a wild journey, certainly since the first time I met you, which was many, many years ago, and you expressed an interest in a podcast training session that I was doing at the time with Ezra Firestone. And here we are with all these podcast episodes downloaded by listeners all around the world, this super high production quality, the design and everything, the effort you've put into it. How did this all start?
Well, the podcast started because I wanted to write a book about my journey and self-development and how I transformed myself. I'm literally unrecognizable from who I was a little over a decade ago. And in fact, after I started showing up at conferences again after my transformation, people didn't recognize me, and that was pretty fun. So I was working on this self-help book, and I hired a ghostwriter to help me. That ghostwriter needed to interview some subject matter experts. He wanted to record those and then just throw them out after he was done extracting the useful bits out of them to incorporate into the book. And I thought, wow, what a colossal waste and shame to toss out those audio recordings. And frankly, I should be the one to do the interviewing so that those could be used in a way that maybe could serve others beyond just the snippets that are pulled and incorporated into the book. So that's how the podcast, The Optimized Geek, got started, which is now Get Yourself Optimized. And then a couple months into it, I'm realizing, wait a second, I really should be doing a marketing podcast as well. Thus, Marketing Speak was born. This was all in 2015. I had started, I guess it was a false start with podcasting back in like 2007, because I only did a handful of episodes back then, maybe 10, and then I pod faded. I stopped it. And yeah, took a good 8 years until I revisited that, but I'm so glad I did. I've been on it ever since. I haven't missed a single week. I'm, almost 300 episodes in for each of the two shows. And yeah, I'm not going to stop. But that's just the podcasting. I think you also were alluding to what was the kind of story behind why I'm doing what I do generally in terms of internet marketing and SEO and personal development and so forth. Is that is that what you were alluding to as well?
Yeah, I think you've sort of gone up a few categories. You started in a technical area, you went to a personal area in your life, and then you've brought them back together, and perhaps you've built an audience of people who have an interest in both business and in personal. I'm really keen to know what things have surprised you on your journey of podcasting and building this show that you have.
Yeah. So much. So many amazing epiphanies and opportunities that have presented themselves because I've been podcasting and not trying to extract as much value for myself as just trying to be helpful and give to my audience. And so, yeah, these podcasts have not been a big lead source. They haven't been ROI positive in the traditional sense. If you put it on a balance sheet, sure, there's goodwill, but the the bottom line is this has been a money loser ever since I started it, and that's okay because I know I'm revealing light in the world by having these two shows. I guess what surprised me the most is how I've evolved as a person, transformed even because of the podcasts and because of certain guests that I've had on. I've had, for example, a guest on Get Yourself Optimized who saved a family member's life, like during the episode. And it sounds like a crazy story, but just even the fact I was open to having a psychic medium on my podcast in the first place, because a year prior I would have said, yeah, no, that's a little too out there for me. But I just felt compelled to have this advertising and marketing guy who was really good at it, copywriting and so forth, who also happened to be a medium, and he just mentioned that on the side in a mastermind meeting online. I'm like, I got to interview you. I have something about you makes me really intrigued, and I want to have you on my podcast. And he said yes, and next thing you know, we're doing the interview, and it just so happens that one of my family members was having a medical emergency, but she didn't believe it was. And my wife, Ryan, interrupted the podcast to ask if this was actually something that was serious, and it was. And he said exactly what the outcome was going to be, and that was not good. So we convinced this family member to go to the emergency room, and thank goodness it saved her life. So crazy stuff like that. I've had epiphanies from different biohackers, and I had an Akashic Records reading during one of my podcast episodes. That was pretty wild and amazing. It's been an incredible, wonderful journey. I'm looking forward to what's to come in the coming months. So it's an exciting and also challenging time to be alive, but I'm ready for the challenge.
Well, I want to challenge you a little bit today, Stefan. I wonder on all your podcasts, you're speaking to other people. Normally, they're the guest. Do you ever get to talk about your SEO stuff?
Not really, a little bit. I'm mostly focused on the guest, and I want them to look amazing, and I want them to get leads and deal flow and partnerships, JVs and so forth from being on my show. I always ask at the beginning, before we hit record, what would make this the very best podcast interview you've ever done? And most people say, well, that's a question I've never gotten during a podcast. I appreciate you asking me that. And then they have to think for a minute or so because they weren't prepared to answer that question. And does provide for a better outcome for everybody if we think in those higher kind of terms. What is the end game here? What's a more powerful intention for the episode? So yeah, that's how I normally show up for a podcast. I think about how am I going to reveal light or make a difference for people through this podcast interview I'm about to do, and how do I add value, significant value for the person I'm interviewing. So yeah, it's not much in the terms of dropping gold nuggets of my knowledge in the episode, because the star is the guest.
Well, today the spotlight's firmly on you, Stefan, and I'd like to go there. I'd like to talk about SEO. I'd like to think about what would make this a great episode for you and for your listener, because that's why you do it. Clearly, you give so much. I'd love to start off with, where do you see SEO going in the very short term? I'm going to ask you a different question later, but is SEO still hot? And if it is, what part of SEO should we be focused on?
Yeah, it is very important and will continue to be, at least until personal agents or digital assistants kind of take over the role of finding and curating and aggregating, sorting, all that. of the information overload that we're deluged with. So typically what we do is we get deluged in our email inbox, then we go to social media and we get another deluge, then we hop onto Google and specifically search out things that we're trying to accomplish, problems we're trying to solve, but we think we're laser focused, but we're also getting a deluge there too, and millions or billions of search results returned. We could go down endless rabbit holes. If there's a digital assistant, an AI that understands us, our needs, our desires, and what makes us tick, and does all the Google searching for us, and perusing through the news feeds and all the deluge, that's going to be a pretty significant sea change in how we interface with the internet. So that's coming, but it's at least a few years away, and I do think that there are some privacy and security concerns that will need to be addressed before people feel comfortable giving so much power away to a digital assistant, especially one that's run by a big tech company, that's probably getting monetization or some sort of incentive from your data. But setting all that aside, if you're not doing SEO, if you're not proactive about managing, curating the results that appear for at least your brand searches and things like your company name, your personal name, and so forth, and making sure you have a knowledge panel over on the right-hand side, making sure that it's the best stuff possible, your best media mentions and feature stories in mainstream media and so forth should be on page one and not just social profiles. And hopefully your homepage is number one for your brand if it's your LinkedIn or it's a competitor who has the same name or a totally unrelated site. That's a big problem that erodes your credibility with it erodes your credibility with users, with searchers. And so even if you get all your business from referrals, if people are doing their due diligence by Googling you before they pick up the phone or send an email to you, and then they decide, maybe I'm not going to make this contact because this person doesn't seem like a fit, or this business doesn't seem very big or that legit. Big problem, right? So that's just the brand SERPs. Well, what about the non-brand SERPs or search engine results pages where you need to know what keywords or search queries your ideal target audience is typing into Google, and then to match those queries with your best content that solves their problem or speaks in their language at least as to what the problem is clear about a path forward and allows them to take the next step with you if that's the point for you of having a website, which usually is the point, right? So if you can identify those right search queries, match that up with your best content, and think about conversion in the process and optimize for both SEO and conversion, that's the 1-2 punch. But AI and just more specifically these days machine learning and then general artificial intelligence as the months and years continue on this decade, you're going to really need to have some assistance in the form of AI tools and probably consultant, somebody like myself, to advise you and help you down this path. Because if you're not proactively doing it, you're just a leaf blowing in the wind, susceptible to whatever the next Google update is, or a competitor coming in and damaging your reputation with Google by doing negative SEO techniques. Yeah, you got to be the captain of your own ship, the person in charge of your own destiny, and SEO is critically important and will continue to be.
It's one of the reasons I got online in the first place. I actually purchased my own name domain because I had been an actor in a film and the IMDb listing was what came up for my name. And I wanted to take control of that. And then many years later, I'm talking about 15 years later, you gave me that same tip about the knowledge panel. And I realized that this is a moving target. You can take control, you can get it all set up, and then it moves. And with the interaction of you help me brush up again and get back control. So I think it's really important to get help with this. Just before the next question, where do we go to get Stefan Spencer to help us with our SEO?
Yeah, the easiest place to go is stefanspencer.com. I have a new website also offering agency services. I have a new website offering agency services that I'm very excited to announce. That's netconcepts.com. And you can work with my team there, or you can work directly with me by contacting me at stefanspencer.com. So the more kind of high-end, high-touch, well, not that an agency isn't high-touch, but if you want to work with me directly, that's a pretty awesome and unusual opportunity to work with a thought leader in the SEO space directly and not just with their team. So I still offer that, even though I'm offering now some agency services with my team of about 12 people. So,
well, that's the kind of thing where I say, get in on that while you can, before Stefan changes his mind. I remember I had a quote from a client of mine when I was doing coaching, and his little sentence was, work with James while you still can. And as of last year, I stopped that service for new people. So I can relate to where you're going here. While you can work with Stefan, that's how you do it. Now, I imagine you've got access to tools and resources that the average e-commerce store owner may not have access to, and then you probably know how to use them better. Do you want to talk about how important having the right toolkit is for an SEO practitioner?
Yeah. So for a business owner, it's important to work with the right SEO practitioner, expert who has all the right tools for the job. Because if you can't see what is coming down the pike because you don't have tools that are giving you predictive or preemptive information, it's all looking in the rearview mirror to see what already happened. You can't drive a car just looking in the rearview mirror. You'll crash. You can't manage your SEO only looking at what has happened in the past in Google Search Console and Google Analytics and so forth. You need proper SEO tools that will give you predictive metrics that tell you if you're heading in the right direction before the traffic shows up. So that would include, from a link analysis standpoint, looking at, for example, linkresearchtools.com will give you LRT trust and LRT power metrics. Not every tool out there that does link analysis will tease apart trust from importance or power. That's critically important because of Google has this drive to give more authoritative and important websites higher visibility, and to demote those sites that have lower credibility. This is called EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. That acronym actually came out of Google. It was first published in the Quality Rater Guidelines from Google. And back in the day, long time ago, those Quality Rater Guidelines would get leaked because they were confidential. They were for the human reviewers that Google contracted, or I was going to say employed, but they were actually technically contractors. This army of people who would go through websites and determine if it was credible or not, if it was well constructed, if it was helpful, not helpful. They would grade all these web pages, and they continue to do so. You might wonder, well, why the heck does Google have a bunch of humans? It seems kind of counterintuitive, but then when you think about how machine learning works, you need a massive training data set to give to the machine learning algorithm so it can figure out what is good or not good based on that training data. So it's not a direct correlation if somebody in this massive army of human reviewers hits a big red X on your website because it's poor quality or isn't credible or authoritative. You're not going to have that show up immediately as a penalty. They don't have that kind of power. That goes into an algorithm that then learns how to treat the entire internet, not just your website. So you are still, kind of up a creek, but it's not immediate. It's eventual. If you get that big red X on your website from these human reviewers. So EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. So getting the trust component from a link analysis tool so you know if you're considered trustworthy or not. Very, very important. There aren't very many tools that offer this. linkresearchtools.com is one of them. Another is Majestic, which gives you trust flow and citation flow, and trust flow is the trust component, and citation flow is the importance component. Another thing that I really like about linkresearchtools.com is LVT, link velocity trends. If you have a negative percentage in LVT, that means you're losing links faster than you're gaining them. You are looking less and less relevant to the global conversation as far as Google's concerned if you're on a downward trend, losing more links than you're gaining them. And it's not just the number of links, it's quality, it's importance, it's trust, all that is baked into it. But just this metric gives you some insight into the velocity of your link acquisition. And if you aren't doing link building, good luck to you, right? You can't just assume that, it's a beautiful day, can't wait for somebody to just discover my website and link to me. I'm really excited. I wonder who it's going to be today. It doesn't work that way. So you need to proactively do outreach, and that's where another tool comes in. It's my favorite outreach tool that's called Pitchbox. Pitchbox, which my team uses, does outreach in a way that is scalable but not spammy, provides workflow and pipeline reports. It's almost like a Salesforce.com for link outreach. And it's not just for link outreach. You could use it for just general PR and doing strategic partnerships and trying to get JVs and so forth. But mainly it's used for link building. So that tool is essential. Many people aren't aware that it even exists, so it's surprising. But all the big agencies that offer link building services know that Pitchbox is the tool to have for this. Trying to do it without automation or without the ability to keep track of everything, whether somebody followed up and then send an automatic follow-up after X number of days, which you can set to, let's say, 10 days or whatever, and you load in all your templates, and those templates can be customized per each outreach. You can employ a separate team to do the backfilling of data that goes into these personalized emails based on the template. It's just super cool. I can't imagine trying to outreach to a lot of website owners and bloggers without a tool like this. Then from a on-page and just auditing standpoint, there are tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush and Write, RYTE, and Search Metrics, Rank Ranger. There are a bunch of really great tools out there, Conductor, Searchlight, that will give you insight into what's broken and missed opportunities on page, on site. So there's on-page SEO and there's off-page SEO. Off-page is all the stuff that's related to links and things that are helping build your reputation as far as Google sees you outside of yourself. And then there's the on-page SEO, which would be everything from title tags to body copy, placement of the the keywords and topics on the pages, etc.
Knowing how hard it is to build an SEO agency and to power up with all the tools and then to actual implementation, how practical is it for small to medium businesses to try and even come close to replicating that in-house versus just hiring someone to help them as a contractor?
Yeah, it's a lot easier just to hire an outside firm or contractor. I'm actually speaking on Brighton SEO's Outreach Summit on the topic of building an in-house link building team. But that's
Good
for
luck.
a very exclusive set of folks who have the means and the desire to stay at the very cutting edge of SEO, to invest in some pretty expensive tools and trainings, and send their team to all the SEO conferences or virtual conferences at this point. But there's a lot of investment involved, and if you do it wrong, then you're not just wasting your time, you're potentially damaging your SEO and having to dig yourself out of a hole, because the link profile that looks artificial and engineered to Google is something that would need to be like cleaned up, and not just, I'll disavow all those links that look a little too engineered to Google. You've given Google a big heads up that, hey, I'm doing link building, so you should scrutinize my stuff a lot more than you normally would. That's not the kind of attention you want to get from Google, and just saying, oh, well, I'll just clean it up after the fact by putting a bunch of the spammier links or more artificial looking links into a disavow file and uploading that into Google Search Console. Yeah, that's not great. If you can just think about from a common sense perspective, the repercussions of that, it doesn't look good.
I imagine there's still SEO practitioners out there who might lean on tactics that may not necessarily be in the best interests of their customer and can actually cause a lot of damage in a short time. Do you have any suggestions? And obviously people should hire you, but what would be on your little checklist of things to ask an SEO agency before you decide to invest with them?
Yeah, it's really tricky when you don't know SEO from
For which they're not. There's no chance they're going to know even what's contained in your pinky about SEO. So, they've got a really unfortunate situation. They have to try and hire a contractor for something they won't fully comprehend. Are there some red flag questions where the answers would be an indicator?
Yes, there are. I actually created a free download on stefanspencer.com called the SEO BS Detector.
Right, we should link to that.
Yes, I will include a link in the show notes to that PDF. A few examples of questions in that document. For example, what's your process for optimizing my meta keywords? And if you're just an innocent business owner without really an understanding, I'd say naive business owner naive to SEO, they're just going to maybe slightly correct you and say, well, meta keywords probably aren't that important these days, or it's not as much of a signal as it used to be. Those are all wrong answers. The only right answer is meta keywords never counted in Google, and whoever has ever advised you to focus on meta keywords is not good at SEO. So that's the only right answer, and many people will just answer the question in terms of like, well, here's our process, here's what we do. We don't really consider this an important signal anymore, but Google never, ever, not on day one, counted meta keywords, and good SEOs know that. So that's an example. You could ask them about what SEO tools they use. The challenge with that is if you don't know anything about the tools that they respond with, then you won't be able to ask a follow-up question. I remember interviewing on behalf of one of my clients, a candidate for an in-house SEO role, and I did ask him that question: what were your favorite? What is your absolute favorite SEO tool? And when he responded, he said Majestic SEO. I already knew something was amiss because Majestic rebranded to just Majestic years ago and no longer refer to themselves as Majestic SEO. So I asked a follow-up question: what's that metric that's really important in Majestic? And he answered what I thought he would answer: AC rank, which was deprecated at the time 2 to 3 years prior to that interview. So this favorite SEO tool of his, he clearly hasn't been into for 2 to 3 years minimum. So I knew to quickly wrap up that interview. But if you ask questions that are on this cheat sheet that I've created, there's really only one right answer for each one of those. So yeah, like for example, another quick one just off the top of my head is asking about keyword density. So what's a good keyword density to aim for? What's typical? How does that work? Keyword density, of course, is another lousy metric that maybe was popular 15 years ago, but it's even then I thought it was ridiculous. The number of occurrences of that keyword in the page actually making a positive impact on your rankings. I mean, that just sounds silly. I want to rank for lawnmower. I should put lawnmower in my page 5.5 times. What?
Yeah, and you'll have all the associated words in this little cluster that there's some great joke about that when you're at a dinner party talking to an SEO and they start, keyword spamming the conversation.
Yeah.
I remember people used to ask if they can put white text on the white page to trick the search engine, by having the keyword there more.
Yeah, that was a long
some people
time
actually
ago,
thought
but yeah.
they get ranked alphabetically. They wanted to have an AA aardvark domain to come up tops in the search results.
Yep. Yeah, there's still companies out there that probably still exist.
Crazy.
That their name begins with the number 1 because they wanted to be number 1.
Right. But it's okay if number 1 is in your domain, if you do design or whatever. So what about budget? Like, I think people look at SEO as an expense, and it's a bit like your podcast. There's probably a lot of upfront work and expense with not a lot to show for it at the beginning. So what do you think is a reasonable time frame or expectation for a return on investment, and what kind of return on investments have you seen? I want you to think about people you may have worked with over the last couple of years. Do any stand out that have shocked them or disappointed them? Is there a balance, or is it always an upside? Is there sometimes a downside? What would be the difference? And what sort of numbers are we talking about here?
Okay, those are a lot of questions. Let me see if I can remember them all.
I'm going to make you think.
Okay, first of all, let me address some of the last part of that.
Yeah.
Some clients who have really stood out as getting amazing results. I do have case studies on my website on stefanspencer.com and actually on netconcepts.com as well. But I'll just name a few examples and the kinds of results that we achieved. Otherworld Computing, which makes Mac memory, RAM, and solid-state hard drives. They, within 6 weeks of implementing my audit, received millions of dollars in additional revenue that they were not counting on, that was over and above the whole work from home trend that did also benefit them because they did see an uptick in their business. But separate from that, they saw a huge uptick in their online sales, and they attributed that to me and the work that I did on the audit and their implementation of that, my oversight of them implementing that. And that is a very unusual circumstance in terms of a 6-week turnaround, because SEO takes time. But amazing result. And yeah, by the time this episode airs, there should be a case study published for Other World Computing on my website, so check that out. Typically, I'd say allow 6 months, or at least 5 months to a year for the SEO to really kick in. And you're not going to get an ROI on a strategy deliverable until it's implemented. So think about the implementation time and then getting to completion, and then add an additional 5 to 12 months. And I'm not just making that number up. Google has mentioned this on the record that I think they said 4 minimum to 12 months is a time frame that you should allow for SEO results to occur from the work that you did. And that was Miley Oye at Google on the Webmaster Central team saying that on a Webmaster Central video. So that's from Google's perspective, and I totally agree with that. Some other examples of results that maybe smaller businesses, not an 8-figure business necessarily. You as a listener may not have a even 7-figure business yet, but you can get incredible results for your small business with SEO if you think strategically and then you execute on that strategy. Great example of that is Chris Parker, whatismyipaddress.com. Small business, and I'm not sharing data out of turn here because he said this publicly. He was actually a guest on this podcast some months ago talking about the work we have been doing together. Still a client, been working together for 4 years now, I think. And he implements very well. I mean, he's on it. He gets stuff done, things that I recommend and guide him to implement. And also my team does a lot of implementation for him, writing articles, creating Lumen 5 videos and infographics and other content marketing stuff, workbooks and guides and so forth, buyer's guides. And I also guided and oversaw the big site redesign that he implemented. So that is a great small business example. And numbers wise, he started at a sub 7-figure business. He was like 600,000, and he's now like double that. And he's expecting to do great things in the coming months and years because we've got a great roadmap and strategies mapped out. So 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, who knows? Sky's the limit. He's very excited. We're actually also looking at other opportunities beyond just his one website, right? So that's another thing too, is you could do roll-ups. You could acquire other web-based businesses. You could create a new brand from scratch. In fact, Chris did that. He created Easy Prey, a podcast about scams and malware and security vulnerabilities and privacy and all the things that you as a consumer need to be aware of so you don't get snookered, so you don't get scammed, you don't get your cryptocurrency wallet emptied. All that sort of stuff is really, really important, and he wants to add a lot of value out there for people through his podcast episodes. And yeah, so that idea of a podcast came from me. The name of the podcast came from me, and he's really happy with where things are at. And just a fun little example of a podcast interview he did was John McAfee, the founder of McAfee Antivirus, who is quite a character. Anyways, so yeah, two ends of the spectrum there. But I've worked even bigger brands have been clients like Chanel and Sony and Zappos and Volvo and so forth. But I think for our listener, smaller business examples are more relevant.
I think so. I mean, how much are we talking about here? How much are they going to have to pay for the strategy And then, of course, you hinted at some of the resources that will be required. And, it's clear there's going to be a huge correlation between implementing and getting the result, because you can get the strategic ideas, you can have all these wonderful things you're going to do, and then you could just get bogged down on the next 12 months thrashing out a website design. So obviously it comes with the requirement that you execute and implement, but how much can they actually start off with, if you want to give us sort of a budget?
Yeah. Well, the pricing that you'll hear in the marketplace runs the gamut, anywhere from hundreds of dollars per month to hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. I know of some agencies that work with, for example, online casinos and other difficult to optimize industries, payday loans and so forth, which I don't work with. That's not my jam, but they'll charge six figures a month to work with a big online casino or whatever. But if you're spending $200, $300, $400, $500 a month, whatever they're doing for you is probably essentially nothing. Just shuffling some papers around and looking busy, creating a report every month without doing any real heavy lifting behind the scenes. So that's a waste of time and a waste of money, even though it's a little bit of money. If you're spending, let's say, $2,000 a month, even that is not enough to hire somebody who's really good, who understands SEO deeply. People who are $2,000 a month are not at the top of their game. They're not at the top of the industry. Now, if you're talking $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month in monthly retainer, now you're talking getting potentially a really pretty good SEO. If you want the very top SEOs, somebody who kind of wrote the book on the topic, sort of thing, co-wrote the book, somebody like myself.
I can see the book on your bookshelf there.
Yeah.
Several.
Yeah, we're actually, me and my co-authors are working on the next edition now. So I'm hoping it won't exceed 1,000 pages, because we're at 994 pages, and the publisher has kind of gently warned us not to go past 1,000 pages. A book that's 1,500 pages won't sell like a book that's 500 pages. It just makes good sense, right? So anyways, if you want to hire and work directly with a person who has that level of knowledge and expertise and industry cred, you're going to pay probably a minimum of $15,000 a month. And that's actually my minimum to work directly with me on a consulting basis. But as I said, I've got an agency, and we do take work that is at the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 price points. Depends on the scope. And so let's say you need link building because you pull up in a tool like Ahrefs or Majestic your authority scores, and you see, wow, those aren't very good. Those are low numbers, right? Trust flow of, let's say, 10 or something out of 100 in Majestic, or DR, domain rating, in Ahrefs of, let's say, I don't know, under 30 would not be good. That is an urgent and important problem to solve. And to address that, if you're not going to build your in-house link building team and use Pitchbox and linkresearchtools.com and all the appropriate tools, you just want to outsource it, you'd be looking at probably about $5,000 a month in monthly retainer, but with the difference that it's on a pay-for-performance basis. I don't know very many SEO firms that will do this. I do. I personally offer this. It's my team that is doing the work on a performance basis, and if we don't get you the links, then you don't pay. Well, you'll get a refund. Now, we don't end up giving a refund because we always deliver, but we would give a refund if we couldn't get you the links. So
there we go.
Sometimes it takes a little longer to, if let's say somebody gets furloughed or laid off on the other side, it's the editorial manager or whoever handles articles, submissions, and things like that, and the opportunity disappears. The journalist that we were working with decides, what, we're going to scrap that story, or their boss does. Nothing we can do about that. We just go and get another link, but it takes a little bit of time to replace a link that's a link opportunity that we weren't able to land. So each link is costed out on a sliding scale based on authority metrics like DR and Ahrefs. So a more powerful link is going to cost more than a less powerful link, but that's to be expected, right? And if you're doing a $5,000 a month retainer, you'll get some great links out of that. And we focus on quality, and we never pay for links. If anybody, that's another great question to weed out those SEOs that you shouldn't be working with. It's like, do you ever pay for links? Do you, buy off the webmaster or the blogger? Is that an appropriate thing to do? And if they say, well, you know what, this is the real world, and yeah, we do it, and everybody else does, that's the wrong answer. That's an answer that should make you turn and run.
This is such good advice. What if someone's not sure if you could help them or not? They're on the fence thinking, okay, Stefan's obviously the guy. I hear you. I've seen, there's examples of businesses who have gone really well. It's going to cost a little bit of coin, and it's not going to happen instantly. I could be okay with that, but can they just ask if you could have a look at their site, or tell them if they're going to get help, or can they buy an audit? Is there some process for them to get reassurance that you feel confident that you could help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are multiple paths to solving this. I'm more than happy to jump on a call with any of my listeners. You guys are my tribe, my peeps. So anybody who wants a 20-minute free consult with me, happy to do that. So I'll include a link in the show notes to that. But yeah, that's a given. But also, if you're thinking, well, what can I do from a paid standpoint to get a roadmap or some sort of assessment that's a deeper dive than just a 20-minute call with screen sharing and pulling up a few different tools. And so an audit could be with my agency, or it could be with me directly. It will be more if I'm doing the audit and delivering it than if it's the agency. But yeah, depending on which path you want to go down, either go to netconcepts.com, the agency, or go to stefanspencer.com to work directly with me on an audit, and book a strategy call, and we'll talk through the details and get that going. If you don't implement an audit, though, you're not going to get ROI. So that's really important to understand. Unimplemented deliverables do not produce results, and that's not good for either one of us. A referenceable client is the only kind of client I want to have. One that, if they're willing to be a reference, that's great. But if they wouldn't provide or wouldn't have the results to provide on a call or in an email to someone, that's not good for either one of us, right? So success is the key. You could be happy with me, but not get the success, and that's not workable for either one of us. You got to be successful with what we're doing together.
One thing that I noticed when I started doing SEO was Google was like this praise machine. If you did a good job, it gave you praise. And it was quite this discovery for me that finally I can be acknowledged for doing good work. And I get a sense that for you, there's quite an element of satisfaction when you can get a result for a customer. And I think that's why perhaps you're happy to be on a performance basis.
Yeah.
But do you still get a special feeling when you see that result come up on the top of the search results? Do you have this little happy dance feeling inside?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you might think it makes me a real geek to be jazzed about SEO updates and nuances and things that I learn and kind of reverse engineer, but it does really juice me. It does light me up. I like figuring
It's a
out the
game, isn't it?
black box of Google or whatever the
If only
algorithm
they'd leaked
is.
the algorithm.
Yeah. It's fun. It's like putting a puzzle together, or it's like rebuilding an engine from scratch. So that's yeah.
What do you think someone listening to your show would be dying to ask you now that we've got you on the spotlight? By the way, you've been a fantastic guest today. I've been really interested in this, and I've spoken to you many, many times about SEO. And every time I speak with you, I learn something. And I can't say that about everyone I speak to. And I think you've revealed a little bit of yourself, but also the way you operate in your own business. And we don't get to see that when you're the host and the spotlight's firmly on the guest. But what do you think a listener would just love to get out of Stefan while he's the guest on the show? Do you have any special guest segment or tricky questions at the end, or a little ritual that needs to be done before we close this session?
I don't. I don't have like what are the three things that whatever, I know some podcasters do that. I don't believe in having anything scripted in a podcast. Just free form everything. And so you're asking me, what would a listener who's part of my regular tribe most want to know from me that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, and if you can't think of something, I can guess what it might be as well.
Well, let's start with what sort of strategies and tactics would make a big difference that are easy to implement, wouldn't require hiring Stefan or even any SEO, and would give a feeling of success or positive momentum. And in answer to that, I would say start by going into Google Search Console and making sure that you've claimed your domain property. So that's not just https://www. whatever your company name.com, whatever. It's the entire domain and all subdomains and HTTP and HTTPS included, all of that wrapped together into one. Make sure that you've claimed that in Google Search Console, which is a free tool. Everyone who's listening must have a Google Search Console account set up with their website in there. And again, domain property. Then go into the performance section where you get to see what keywords are bringing in organic traffic from Google, and go to the tab that's pages or URLs and see what the top performing pages are beyond just your homepage. Probably your homepage is the top of the list there. But what's the second or third or fourth most trafficked, visited from Google searchers page? And click on that. Pick one that you're passionate about that'll get you excited to work on, right? So click on that one. Maybe it's your top-selling product. Or maybe it's a blog post that just everybody seemed to love and ended up getting shared a lot on social media and lots of links to it, etc. You click on that, and then click back onto the Queries tab that shows the search queries for that particular page. So now you have filtered down this huge list of keywords that people are typing into Google that land them on your website. And now it's just those keywords that are delivering visitors from Google to that particular page, that single blog post, that single product page or service page. And imagine what gaps that are not showing up in that list. because now you got a much smaller list. What are the gaps there? Maybe there's some synonyms or some ways of framing the problem or the solution in the customer's vocabulary that you're not doing, and thus those words are not showing up on the list. And go back to that page and add the additional section or revise the content, do some copy edit work on that page to incorporate those topics and those phrases into your page. So that's easy to do. It's replicatable because you can go back and do this to the next most important page of your site, and then the next one, and the next one. You don't need to hire an SEO expert in order to start plowing through these most important pages that are already delivering for you, and they're just gaps that you didn't notice. There you go.
That's a great tip. So, in closing, Stefan, what are you most excited about this year?
What I'm most excited about is making a difference for people, and the folks who I'm working with, making a difference in the world and helping them to amplify their message and the value that they're delivering. If you looked at my clients from a few years ago, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, and those that I'm working with now, I'm much more focused on those kinds of clients that are revealing light in the world, making a difference for people, doing good, and not just creating a widget, selling some plastic widget that they just want to sell more of. It's fine if that's what you're doing, but if you have a higher level intention, that really juices me and makes me want to work with you.
Stefan, you're a good man, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to share your story and your expertise on your own show. It's a brave and bold move. I hope it's a hit with the listeners, because this is just a way that you can serve them. And by the way, if you're listening to this show or watching this show, wherever it's published, let Stefan know that you watched this show, that you enjoyed it. Let's pour some love back his way, because he's a good human.
Oh, thank you, James. And so are you. And I really appreciate you. And you've really made a difference in my business, too. And looking forward to doing great things together in the coming year.
Awesome.